The Duke continued to be alternately short-tempered, sullen, bored, and depressed. Can you even imagine it? Here, Kitty Rothschild is laying the supper table every night with her best silver and crystal. She's got all the maids, running hither and there for this man, and all he can do is complain. Kitty Rothschild tried her best, laying on musical entertainment at Christmas Eve with entertainers and musicians from Paris. But who could not be bothered to show up? David! David could not be bothered to show up. He or she has planned entertainment from France. And he's like, gonna skip it. I think I'll watch Mickey Mouse instead. It gets worse. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and on this channel we review biographies and memoirs, and we do extensive reviews of books on this channel. The first book we did was Spare. We did Prince Harry's memoir. As an answer to that, we did Revenge, and we looked at the other side of that story. What was the true story of Meghan Markle, and how did she get into Harry's life, and what was really going on behind the scenes. And after that, we decided that we wanted to talk about the original Harry and Meghan, and that would have been King Edward and Wallace Simpson. And so that's led us to Traitor King. We did the first chapter last weekend. This is chapter 2. This episode's going to be probably 3 times as long as that one. This is a very long chapter. It is chock full of crazy. I mean, juicy details on every page, shocking character sketches of these two. I mean, people who knew them well, journal extracts, diary extracts from people who knew them well, with the most horrific descriptions of their character that I think I've ever read about anyone. I mean, horrifying in their disappointment over who David really was as a person. We're going to call him David throughout the series. I had been kind of quaffling on what I was going to call him. David is what his family called him. It's what Wallace Simpson called him. So David it will be. And this chapter paints a really grim picture of the time between David leaving, giving up the throne, and then him waiting around to get the okay so that he could marry Wallace Simpson. There was a lot of debate about that. Another thing that was very protracted and that took a long time was the financial agreements, what he wanted to be paid versus what they wanted to pay him, what he was willing to give up in his estate claims and things like that. So it's like this back and forth thing. He and Wallace could not be together during all of this. They had to be separated for legal reasons. And his behavior and the way he treated his hostess, who generously opened up one of her homes for him and played as his hostess while he was there. Shocking disregard for her. His manners are horrific. The relationship that he has with Wallace seems so fraught with drama. I have no idea why he was sticking around. I mean, there's not one detail that we've received so far. And I believe we'll get something from this book that'll sort of shed some light and give us some fairness on this, because so far, I didn't understand why he's with this woman. There seems to be nothing that would drive him into her arms, other than the fact that he just set his sights on her, and for some inexplicable reason, she is the hill he will die on. I don't understand it. Hopefully by the end of the book we'll understand it, but this chapter lays out shocking relationships that Wallace had, incredible points of manipulation that she used against him to get what she wanted, devastating connections to Nazi Germany. This chapter is almost a book in of itself. Now, I will say that Andrew Lowney gives us a ton of details, a ton of names, a ton of quick little inserts, quick little descriptors of who a lot of extra players are in the story. Now, if you aren't super familiar with all of the couple's relationships, who are their enemies, who are their compatriots, who they could trust, who are against them, it can be a little bit overwhelming how many names we're going to get in this chapter. I've done my best to edit out what I think is just sort of extra info that is not necessarily going to help us and propel us towards an understanding of the story. But there are a couple of people that I will be sure to give you some background on, because I do think that they are essential players to the story. I want to just go ahead and dive right in, because it is a long chapter. I mean, it's long. Probably this episode may go an hour and a half. I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking right now. mostly because I like to talk. But before we do start the chapter, I did want to say thank you so much for your massive support on the last 2 videos. The one first where I was telling you where I'd been all summer, and then as we were starting Trader King, so much interaction on that video, so many comments. This is such a wonderful corner of the internet. I think that we have a really lovely group of people here. We're all very supportive of each other, very kind. Thank you so much for creating an atmosphere that just draws everybody together. Thank you so much for making this channel a place where people want to come. It's not just my content I'm putting out, but it's all of the comments and all the support and all the kindness that is in the comments that makes this part of YouTube really special. So I just wanted to thank you. Also, my lips, they seem to have, well, they've gone down. I don't know what I had reaction to. That was a nightmare. But I just want to put your hearts at rest. You guys look at me. Look at my eyes right now. I will never get anything done to my face. Okay? Never ever. I don't care if I have bags, wrinkles. I don't care if my, jowls are hanging down to my chest. I will never have anything done to my face. It's just not right. It's just not who I am. I would never do it. So I'm sorry if my lips gave you a fright because you perhaps were concerned. Is she not who I thought that she was? Fine, look at me. I am who you think that I am. I would never have my lips done. And certainly not with that result. Okay, anyway, back to Trader King. Oh my goodness, y'all, this book. It's crazy. Okay, this is called Waiting to Wed. Okay, so it's all the stuff that has to go on. Now, you remember where we left off last time was he had just gotten onto his yacht, the one that he had wanted to call Enchantress, but they put the kibosh on that and said, no, you have to call it something else. So now it's called the Fury. Interesting. And he has gone up there. He's departed with some of his friends who have said that they would go with him. Piers Lee, who had been his escort since 1919, decided to come with the prince indefinitely because he wanted to help him discover his new life. He was very faithful and he was willing to follow his master wherever. So Piers Lee is on the ship with him, along with several other individuals who decided to come and hang out with him. Ulick Alexander was one of his friends, and they have departed on this yacht. Now, it says here that it was 2 a.m. when they got on that boat. It was right after he had given his speech to the nation. I'm abdicating. I'm leaving you in good hands. I will always love you. My brother is a wonderful guy. You can trust him. He's going to do great things. And if England ever needs anything from me, I will do all that I can to help. It's like, well, they didn't need you. They needed you to be king, but I guess you didn't mean that part. So he gives his sorry, sad little speech, and then he promptly goes onto his yacht. Now remember, his attitude this entire time has been one of jubilation. He is thrilled beyond measure. He just feels like he's hit the jackpot. Finally, he can go do what he wants to do. He doesn't have any responsibility. It's all so exciting for him. But the rest of the family was devastated. I mean, all of his brothers were crying. And you'll recall from last chapter, Winston Churchill wept openly about this. He was devastated. He had begged David to stay on as king. Now, I don't really know why Winston Churchill would have done that, because David was of such measly and pathetic moral fiber that it just seems like I would have been happy to show him the door had I been Winston Churchill. But I think he felt like it was just not within the spirit of the English people to abandon your duties. I think he felt like it was going to debilitate and weaken the country if their leader were to really abuse their trust in this way. Anyway, I mean, it all turned out for the good, as we said last time. But at this point, he's getting onto his yacht. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. He is really just beside himself in ecstasy and glee over what he's managed to do. He can finally have the woman that he loves, as he continues to tell everybody, the woman that I love, the woman that I love. And, to hell with everybody else's feelings. Oh, you feel bad? I'll try to schedule some time to feel bad for you, but, can't see when that's going to happen. So he gets on his yacht. The captain, Cecil Howe, had hurriedly had to borrow linen, crockery, and glasses from the royal yacht, and a surgeon commander had been brought on board in case the ex-king's state of mental stress should cause him to require any medical attention while at sea. Everybody's assuming that David's going to be having a hard time with this, assuming that he's going to understand the weight and worth of what he's just done. But no, he just couldn't be bothered to care. He's over there just being like, oh no, I don't feel bad. Let's have drinks. Let's talk about everything that's happened in the last 4 weeks. Ulick, Piers, come on, sit down. Let's talk about it. He keeps those guys up till 4 o'clock in the morning because he just wants to keep on talking. Let's just keep on talking. Let's keep rehashing. Let's keep talking about all the things and all the people who are against me, but all the people who were for me. Let's talk about how I've prevailed in getting what I want with the woman that I love. I mean, these two guys were exhausted. You know, it's like they're so tired, they're getting that feeling in their eyes that there's like sand in their eyes. They're so tired. They just want to go to bed. But no, David wants to keep on talking. Finally, he lets them go. A lot of the time that he was awake, while he's chit-chatting with them about all the events, he's sending farewell telegrams to all of his friends, you know. And the book says, much of the time was spent sending farewell cables to friends. Now, here they are on the yacht, right? They're going to France. And it says that when he was told that the wireless could not be used when the ship reached territorial waters, the Duke ordered the Fury back to sea until he finished his list. And then he had the unmitigated gall to happily confide to another close associate, Lord Peregrine Brownlow, about how much money he'd saved because all those cables were free. You guys, this man was king. Money is not a problem for him. And as we'll go on to read, he had quite a considerable fortune squirreled away that no one knew of. But here he is, over there, you know, giggling into his handkerchief about how much money he saves because he didn't have to pay for the telegrams to all his farewell cables to all these people who he knows is just gonna be so sorry that he's left. The ship docked at dawn, and of course, the first thing he did was hightail it to a telephone because he's got to call Wallace. When I tell you that this man spent time either complaining, crying, acting foolish, or calling Wallace, those are his 4 things. That's what he knows how to do. Complain, whine, act foolish, and call Wallace, in that order. So he gets on the phone to Wallace, and she, meanwhile, had spent most of Saturday depressed about events, couldn't even get out of the bed. She was so distraught was she that he had actually done it, that he'd actually abdicated the throne for her. And one of her friends confided to a journalist, her friend Constance Coolidge confided to Helen Woodron Erskine after listening to the broadcast, that Wallace felt that this was a terrible fate that had befallen her. Her friend said, "Can you imagine a more terrible fate than to have to live up publicly to the legend of a love that you don't feel? To have to face morning, noon, and night a middle-aged boy with no other purpose in life than a possessive passion for you?" This is the way her friends identified her emotional state, as one being distraught because she was forced to live the rest of her days with a middle-aged boy who was besought with her, and there was nothing she could do about it. Wallace, who was 2 years younger than the Prince of Wales, had first been introduced to him at a weekend house party given by Lady Furness in January of 1931. And over the next 3 years, she saw him socially, and by January 1934, she'd become his mistress. Soon the prince began to talk of marriage, a situation that became more critical when he succeeded as king in January 1936. And Wallace was granted a divorce in October from her second husband, Ernest Simpson. Well, but see, the conundrum is this. Wallace Simpson is now twice divorced. She'd been married in her early 20s to this guy named Earl Winfield Spencer. He was an American naval aviator. That had ended in 1927. And now she's getting this divorce from Ernest Simpson. And that was a very complicated situation too. We'll go on to talk about some of the weirdness that surrounded that divorce. It was a very odd relationship that she and Ernest had. And the agreements that they had to getting that divorce, it was all very odd. Which led some people to believe that there had been some sort of collusion. It was all smoke and mirrors is what it was. We'll talk more about it in a minute. But the problem is this. The Church of England, of which the monarch is supreme governor, would not conduct the marriage of a divorced person if their spouse was still alive. The prince would clearly need to choose between marriage to Wallace and being king. And although Wallace had suggested they break off their relationship, David was determined to go ahead, even if that meant surrendering the throne. Now, as we said last time, I don't think that he even wanted to be king. This was a great excuse for him. Why would he want to be king? He hated responsibility. We're going to go on to read about the most childish man you've ever heard of. I mean, it makes Harry sound like an intellectual. But even apart from the fact that she was divorced, people had major questions about what kind of woman she was going to be if she was queen. She just seemed like she really lacked the moral fiber to be a queen, but then also her political alignments were highly questionable. She had a lot of pro-German views. She had a lot of lovers. I mean, it was known that she did. Her affair with the Prince of Wales was hardly her first dilly-dally into the darkness of adultery. And the other thing too is the prince was wasting huge amounts of cash on her. I mean, the lavish gifts. He might have been a penny pincher in some ways. When it came to giving her everything she wanted, I mean, his purse had no limits. It was bottomless what he was willing to give her. So the expensive gifts, her pro-German views, her lovers, it just was all like, she seems like a real problem for us. We need to dispense. If he wants to go with her, go. But I mean, you're going to be exiled. But if you're good with that, may God be with you. So until the abdication actually happened, they decided to put her under police surveillance because they just weren't sure what they were dealing with here. But she didn't seem like she was pure as the driven snow. So in the reports of this police surveillance, it was said that Mrs. Simpson was regarded as a person very fond of the company of men and to have had many affairs. She was with different men at these addresses, which they give, and she seems to have spent a great deal of time with the Prince of Wales, though that did not mean that she did not have another secret lover who was also kept by her. And that guy has been identified as Guy Trundle, who was a salesman with the Ford Motor Company. So, I mean, Wallace, I think, it didn't even matter to her necessarily if the man had power. I think it was really more the game for her. Like, could she keep a man interested in her? Could she, like the game, the cat and mouse? I mean, because I don't think that a salesman with the Ford Motor Company is going to have exactly the same financial benefit to her as the crown prince. But I don't think that was always the point for her. I think it was the game. I think she loved manipulating. So, of course, the police are following her. They are very curious about all these lovers she seems to have all over the place. But also, to add to their concerns, was the fact that they felt like she was really manipulating the Prince of Wales for more money. Not just the lavish gifts, but I mean, it's not like he was just giving her all this jewelry. He was, but he was also giving her quite a stack of cash just to have. It says that the following month, Lionel Halsey, the Prince of Wales treasurer, wrote to George V's private secretary, Clive Wigram, that Wallace, quote, was at present receiving a very handsome income. I also told His Majesty that in my opinion, both Mrs. Simpson and her husband were just hand in glove in getting all that they could out of His Royal Highness. So in their opinion, this was all, like, it wasn't just Wallace Simpson on her own over there milking the cow for all the cash. It was also her husband, who she hadn't divorced yet, also being like, hey, while you're over there, could you get me a little something, something? And she's like, yeah, will do. I mean, those two were like a couple of con artists. And as we'll go on to see at the end of the chapter, how far their con extended. Now, because there was so much concern that Wallace was, I mean, not just this random woman who he's having an affair with, but somebody who is kind of an operator of her own, they felt that these two needed to be separated until things could be sorted out financially, until they could get the okay to actually marry, until he had abdicated the throne and he could marry her. For legal reasons, they had to be separated. Now, it was against this backdrop that over the past few weeks, Wallace had been receiving threats on her life and hate mail. And not just threats on her life, her involvement with the Prince of Wales was causing a lot of angst in the public. And just after Christmas, a Canadian threatened to kill the Duke and was arrested in possession of a knife and a gun. So she's bringing danger to David. So, compounded with the fact that she is an operator, she's of questionable moral integrity, she seems like she is manipulating him for money and for cash, not just her, but also her husband. It was, and now she's receiving death threats, but so is David. It was like, okay, we got to get these, separate. You guys, you two aren't even allowed in the same country. So she goes to stay in Cannes with some friends, and he is homeless. I mean, he has nowhere to go. He's on his yacht, but after he gets off the yacht, he's got nowhere to go. Now, it's important, and we'll see this play out later in the chapter, the people that she goes to stay with are friends that she's had for years. Remember, she's been married once when she was in her 20s and trying to get a quick divorce. She had traveled to China, where I guess I've read that she was given a quick divorce. I'm not really sure how that would work. I don't understand how you get married in America, but then you go to China and you get a divorce. I don't get that. But that's what they say. And while she was there, she got to know this woman named Catherine Rogers. Now, Catherine Rogers was married to a man named Herman. And Herman Rogers and Wallace Simpson have a very weird relationship. Now, some say they were not lovers, they were just really good friends. But even in this chapter, I raise an eyebrow. If my husband had a friend like this, we would have some problems. So just putting it out there, the people that she's staying with are Catherine and Herman Rogers, whom she had met when she was in China. They were Americans there, and they've, I guess, maintained their friendship. And now they're hosting her in France, in Cannes. Well, okay. So that's where she is. Since they've had to be separated, they can't be together. And this is all just such torment for David, because all David wants to do is be with her. And now they're finding out, after they've been separated, that it may be that they can't even get married. The powers that be at the palace wanted to make sure, what's going on here before they would grant David the right to marry her. So they feel like they've given up so much. It was all so that they could get married. And now there's the big question. Well, will we even be able to get married, or is that going to be taken away from us? Now, in official circles, there were continued concerns about the Duke's supporters and Wallace's own ambitions. On December 10th, a Scotland Yard official had written to the commissioner stating that 2 personal protection officers needed to remain with her and Cannes, as indications were that she intended to flit off to Germany. A few days later, the officers reported a phone conversation where Wallace had told the Duke, attempting to sort out a post-abdication financial settlement, that, quote, if they don't get you these things, I will return to England and fight it out to the bitter end. The coronation will be a flop compared with the story that I shall tell the British press. So you can see why they felt that she was a concerning figure. She is over there twisting his arm, complaining he's not doing enough. She has certain financial requirements. She has certain things that she expects him to bring to the table when he shows up on her door. She doesn't just want him, she wants the money. And she had political interests of her own. And on December 10th, Horace Wilson, a senior civil servant, had written to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Neville Chamberlain, of his worries that Wallace Simpson intended, quote, not only to come back here, but aided by what she expects to be a generous provision from public funds, set up a court of her own, and there can be little doubt, to do her best to make things uncomfortable for the new occupant of the throne. It must not be assumed that she's abandoned hope of becoming Queen of England. It's known that she has limitless ambition, including a desire to interfere in politics. She's been in touch with the Nazi movement and has definite ideas as to dictatorship. In short, Wallace Simpson was a huge issue. Not even just after the abdication, but the fear that she was going to push back if she didn't get the money that she wanted in the settlement. So she'd already been deeply disappointed that he'd abdicated the throne for a number of reasons. Certainly, I think she did not want to be joined to him for the rest of her life. He was not a person that she really had much respect for. She, in her personal correspondence, often referred to him as Peter Pan and made derogatory comments just about, what a drag he was to have to be around all the time. And obviously she was upset about having to be yoked to him. But the other thing she's upset about is he would have been king, which even if she wasn't queen, because she couldn't have married him, if she had been his mistress, she would have had quite a lot of sway over what he did. He didn't care for responsibility, and she could have been his puppet master in the way he conducted himself politically. So she was a huge problem, and getting her out of the way was going to require a lot of financial compromise for the palace. It's an interesting point that the night of the Duke's broadcast, there were 500 pro-Nazi supporters who had gathered at Buckingham Palace chanting, "We want Edward," and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, "We want Baldwin, dead or alive." You have to wonder if Wallace Simpson's affection for Nazi Germany is what influenced David to also share that affection. David does not strike me at all as a person who would have had even 2 seconds to think about politics. He doesn't seem to me like somebody who would have been the sort that read past a headline. He just seems to me to be extraordinarily shallow. He certainly was in matters of anything intellectual, so I don't feel like he would have had this burgeoning wisdom or interest when it came to politics. It may have been why it was so easy for him to be convinced of the Nazi point of view, because I don't think he would have looked at anything very deeply. But Wallace Simpson, I think, knew of what she was involving herself in and wasn't bothered by the heinousness of it. Anyway, her Nazi sympathies certainly strengthened his Nazi sympathies, and it was a known fact, enough so that when he was giving that broadcast, he had all these supporters, these Nazi supporters out in the street, screaming for him not to abdicate because they so desired somebody of his affections to reign and rule. Anyway, David, like I said earlier, is homeless. It was him on that yacht, and then where? So he arrives in Europe and takes a special Pullman car all the way to Austria, where, since he has nowhere to go and it's been discovered by his friends that he has nowhere to go, the Baron Eugene and Kitty Rothschild open up their home of Schloss Enzenfeld, and it's just outside of Vienna, and they let him stay there indefinitely until he and Wallace can come together and be married and make up their own home. Now, you guys, Kitty Rothschild is hosting him. As I've alluded to in the last episode and in this one, you are going to be shocked at the way he treats her and her home and her generosity. It is mind-blowing. I don't know if I've ever read about somebody who is this entitled and who is this shameful and without manners. His initial euphoria had now vanished at the reality of his position. On Sunday, the 13th of December, the Archbishop of Canterbury had preached his sermon berating the Duke for seeking, as he said it, happiness in a manner inconsistent with the Christian principle of marriage and within a social circle whose standards and ways of life are alien to the best instincts of his people. Ruined by his disastrous liking for vulgar society and by his infatuation for Miss Simpson, the Duke had been sufficiently angry to consult his lawyer about a lawsuit over that sermon that was preached. So, Meghan and Harry, where are you? That sounds exactly like the sort of thing they would do. But he's realizing that this romantic gesture that he feels he's living out, this fantasy that he's living out, is not being supported. And up until this point, he'd been sort of able to just sort of breeze past everybody else's tears and angst about it because he was getting his way. But now that he's homeless and has nowhere to go and he's having to fall on the, kindness of his, extensive group of friends, now he's starting to realize that maybe it isn't all as beautiful as he once thought it was. Well, not only did the Archbishop of Canterbury have a couple of spicy words for him, but even those closest to him who had worked for him were so glad to wash their hands of him. It says here, there was a relief in official circles that the abdication crisis seemed to have blown over and the couple neutralized. Amongst those who knew the Duke well, he was not missed. Harold Nicholson noted in his diary after lunching on the 14th of December with the Duke's former assistant private secretary, Sir Alan Tommy Lascelles, how he, quote, is so relieved at the fall of his master that he was almost indiscreet. He says that the king was like the child in the fairy story who was given every gift except a soul. There was nothing in him which understood the intellectual or spiritual sides of life, and that all art, poetry, music, etc. were dead to him. He had no friends in this country, nobody whom he would ever wish to see again. He was without a soul, and this made him a trifle mad. He never cared for England or the English. He hated his country since he had no soul, and he did not like being reminded of his duties. That's a pretty damning sketch. You have to wonder how much of that is true and how much of it was written as a response to the stinging unfairness of the whole situation. To repeatedly 3 times say this person had no soul is pretty alarming. But, obviously it's hyperbole, yet I do think that he was of such profound mental, emotional, and intellectual capacity. He was so bereft of these things that I suppose being around him was tiring. This man has so much power and yet he seems to have no skills, talents, or abilities. It probably was very tiring to be around him. And but that almost leads me to say, so why are we sad he had to leave? He sounds like a terrible person. Sounds like England has fallen, ass backwards into all the luck in the world that he found Wallace Simpson. Well, this damning sketch is shared by the Prime Minister Robert Bernays, who had ruminated in his diary only a few days earlier, quote, He hasn't one real friend to lean upon in this frightful emergency. His case seems to be arrested development. He's never passed the stage from boyhood to manhood. He is the spoiled child of success with the film star mentality. He sees his job only in terms of cheering crowds. He has never thought the matter out. He imagined that he would quietly retire into private life, leaving his brother to perform the dreary ceremonial functions while he spent a tranquil life gardening at Fort Belvedere and holidaying on the Riviera, occasionally emerging to open a hospital or review the fleet and receive the cheers that mean so much to him. For the first time, he has been brought up against the fact that abdication means exile, and that for the rest of his life, he can serve no useful purpose. Well, was that written about Harry or was that written about David? Because both of those men seem to be equally described in this passage. Yes, these people, both of these men, act like spoiled children with a film star mentality. Arrested development, absolutely. How many times did we make that diagnosis when we were reading other books about Harry? And even this, he never even thought the matter out. How would it really go if he left his country? How would people really feel about that? And how he thinks he can just retire quietly to private life while his brother picks up the pieces, while his brother does all the hard work. And he thinks that he's just going to be able to come out and open that hospital or examine the fleet and everyone's just going to cheer for him and then he can just go back to doing whatever. That's exactly what Harry thought was going to happen. You know, I mean, what does matter with these men? You know, why are they just so selfish and so entitled to all of their own happiness at the expense of everybody else's? After these two separate, horrific character sketches by two separate people, we can assume that having David in your home would have been a trial akin to nothing else that Kitty Rothschild had ever experienced. In the greatest understatement of the year, Lowney states that Windsor was not an easy house guest. Kitty Rothschild had brought staff from her home in Paris and made great efforts to ensure the Schloss was welcoming, giving him a suite of rooms comprising of a bedroom, a drawing room, a library, a smoking room, a bathroom, and yet he remained depressed and frustrated. He had a bad attitude every time she saw him. He spent his entire time watching Mickey Mouse movies. He went sightseeing, he walked, he played golf and skittles and skied, and once a week he took a Turkish bath in Vienna. There were card games where he played for high stakes, and when he won, he cheerfully collected his winnings. Everyone's got to give him his due, but when he lost, suddenly he didn't have to pay. It was just a game. I'm not gonna pay you. It was just a card game. Come on. But he wanted to make sure he got his winnings when it was his turn to win. He distracted himself, according to Piers Lee, who had remained with him, by playing the jazz drums very loud, along with a gramophone record. He also drank quite a lot of brandy, and he performed, and I find this to be almost the most egregious of the things that he did. He performed his celebrated imitation of Winston Churchill trying to persuade him not to abdicate. Isn't that the most childish of all the things? Even more childish than sitting there watching Mickey Mouse films or playing the drums to a gramophone record. To mock the man who cared so much for his country that he wept because you were leaving, who tried desperately to get you to stay, and then as a parlor trick, you would do that imitation for everybody. That is so sickening to me. Now, if all that wasn't enough, there he is playing the drums in your upstairs room, you know, to this blaring music that's going on. He does nothing all day but amuse himself. And he has the gall to complain to you every time you see him. Then there was the matter of his huge shopping bills. Okay, now listen to this. When he shopped, he sent the bills to the British legation where no one knew what to do with them. Why are you sending your shopping bills to us? We're not going to pay for this. Until an equerry, probably Piers Lee himself, paid them out of his own pocket. You guys, hear me when I say to you this. David had money. We're going to go on to talk about how much money he had. People had no idea how much he'd squirreled away, and really, quite frankly, where it was all coming from. He'd been squirreling cash away for years, okay? So for him to go out shopping and then send his bills to the British legation and be like, you guys got that? Shocking. Shocking. And then his servant ends up paying them out of his own pocket. But then, listen to this. Eventually, the British government said the purchases were not their responsibility And then they sent the bills to the Rothschilds. Are you hearing what is coming out of my mouth? David would go shopping, spend hundreds and thousands of dollars. When he couldn't get the British government to pay his bills, the British government billed the Rothschilds, his host. They've opened up their home. They're bringing staff in from their Paris home. They are giving him a lavish suite of rooms. They are entertaining him day and night. And then they get his shopping bills and he lets them pay them. The unmitigated gall of this man is astounding to me. I cannot even believe this. This is so humiliating. You are an ex-king. You are not poor. You are not begging from scraps. Why are you going out and letting your host and hostess pay your bills? This is an embarrassment. Now, here's a little story that we're told, and I don't really get it. Maybe you guys can help me understand what this means. So right on the tail of telling about how he was fine that the Rothschilds were being billed for his lavish shopping trips about town, it goes on to say that he was lunching with Sir Walford Selby, the British ambassador, and he asked what the silver rings around the napkins were. And he was told they're napkin rings. And he expressed surprise that there was not fresh linen with every meal. Now, what is this story trying to tell us? Is it trying to emphasize his unbelievable stupidity? Are they trying to show that he was like incredibly entitled? Because obviously that's an entitled statement to be like, why is there not fresh linen with every meal? But why would he have thought that a napkin ring indicated the linen was not fresh? You know what I mean? I don't understand why he would say that. And maybe that's the point of the story, that he didn't understand the things that were being said to him. He didn't understand anything, and his entire attitude was just of entitlement, so he would just say non sequiturs. I don't understand. Maybe you guys can help me understand that. I don't know. Anyway, to compound all of his negative behavior, not only him being an unbelievably unpleasant house guest, but then spending tons of money and then being like, you guys are going to pay my bills, right? Oh, you got it? You got it? Okay, good. He spent much of his time on the phone to Wallace. The bill at the end of his stay came out to £800, which he too expected the Rothschilds to cover. I meant to look this up before I started filming and I did not. But even to this day, if somebody was at my house and then handed me just an $800 bill that I had nothing to do with, I'd be like, what the hell is this? But £800 in 1936? How much is that? Can somebody do the math for us and tell us? It's got to be astronomical. He missed Wallace. Perry Brownlow, his loyal friend, who had escorted Wallace to the south of France in December, now joined him. And this is a shocking description of David's behavior. David invited Perry into his rooms to talk. They talked until 3 o'clock in the morning. And Perry witnessed that all around David's bed, propped up on chairs, on tables, were pictures of Wallace. And he counted 16 photographs encircling David in his bed. And then, to put the cherry on top of this creepy sundae, David would curl up and sleep with a pillow that had her initials on it. What is the matter with this man? Perry Brownlow said that it was as if he were in a crypt. And there, watching him fall asleep to this, cuddled up to this little pillow that belonged to her that had WS on it, just really creeped Perry out. And I don't blame him. Now, do any of us understand this relationship that he has with Wallace Simpson? Certainly I do not, because the author says that David was constantly belittled and undermined by Wallace. So he's got that negative situation going on. Every time he's on the phone with her, it's just, yeah. She's never happy. But he's, to compound all of his emotional troubles with her, he's also angered by his family's refusal to acknowledge the woman he loved and the protracted financial negotiations. Why are they taking so long and dragging their feet? Why won't they just let him marry his girlfriend? Windsor, at this time, had become paranoid And he later admitted that it was a sense of powerlessness that brought him close to the breaking point. He says, I could do nothing but wait and count the days, which he did. At the end of every day, he would check off a date until he could see the love of his life. The situation was not helped because Wallace was constantly, jumping at his throat because she believed that he was in an affair with Kitty Rothschild. And she wanted to gripe to him every time they were on the phone about how she knew there was something going on between them. Now, you and I both know that she was just complaining to complain. First of all, this woman has got multiple affairs going all over the time on her own. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that she'd be okay with him having an affair, but the very fact that she would think that he was having an affair with Kitty Rothschild is ridiculous. And the way we can tell is this. When David was in love with somebody, he would lavish them with gifts beyond our wildest imagination. He may not have been able to spend 2 pennies for anything normal, but when it came to lavishing his lovers with gifts, again, the bottom of the purse knew no bounds. He has not given one thing to Kitty Rothschild that is due her, not even the kindness of a smile, because he's constantly griping against her. There are no gifts being given to Kitty Rothschild, as we'll discuss in a minute. There is not even the common decency to pay his own bills. Wallace Simpson should have been able to know, and I believe she did know, that there was no love between the two of them. That Kitty and David definitely did not have something going on. She's just trying to be a good friend. And I mean, he's the ex-king. If you have a home and you have the ability to open it up and you are a kind enough hostess to do so, I think that it is not beyond reason that you would say, okay, I've got this other house. It's in Austria, let me help you in your time of need. If she was a friend of his, that makes sense that she would have done that. But there could be no truth behind the fact that Wallace really believed there was an affair happening, please. There was also, to continue to compound the negativity that's surrounding them, a series of articles were being published in America by a distant relative of Wallace Simpson. There were these articles that ran in various American papers that were written by Newbold Noyes, the husband of Wallace's second cousin. Now, he was a part owner of the Washington Evening Star. That was the city's largest afternoon daily, and had offered to write some supportive articles about the couple. And the previous November, he had come to Britain, where he was given the use of an office at Buckingham Palace, and on the basis of 3 hours of interviews, he had written 14,000 words. But the articles were not now to the couple's taste. Wallace repudiated them, claiming in a statement that she had not invited him to Britain, they were not related, and she had not approved the articles. No. She doesn't know him. She never gave him access. What in the world is this? Statements over the authenticity of the articles flew between the parties for the next year, and Wallace tried to sue Noyes using as her lawyer, you guys, Armand Gregoire, who had acted for her former husband Ernest Simpson's interests in France. He proved to be an unfortunate choice. Yet one more understatement from Lowney. This guy, Armand Gregoire, is so problematic, you will not believe his connections. Sit down, friends. Let's find out who her lawyer was. Let's find out about his connections. Now, the first thing we learn about him is like a slap in the face. It's like, whoa, what? Are you kidding me right now? Gregoire, whose appearance was enhanced by a dueling scar, the mark of the leading Nazi party, across his left cheek, was also the lawyer for some of Hitler's most important officials. His Minister of Foreign Affairs, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Rudolf Hess. Hermann Göring was also a client of this lawyer, as well as the chief contact of Sir Oswald Mosley in Paris, where he was responsible for channeling funds to Mosley's British Union of Facets from Mussolini. Also, this man was the founder and director of Marcel Boucard's fanatical Franchist movement, one of the leading fascist cells in France. And under the pseudonym of Greg Lefranc, he had contributed pro-Hitler articles to the official journal of the movement. According to a 1934 French report, he was one of the, quote, most dangerous of Nazi spies. And this is Wallace Simpson's lawyer. Do you hear what I am saying to you? Who was this woman? I mean, the lawyer who she had met through her ex-husband, because he had been her husband's lawyer in France. So, I mean, it's like, this woman is not like casually looking over at Germany being like, what's wrong with some of their ideas? They're just new ideas. No, this lady is rolling with these people of the most nefarious backgrounds and the most dangerous connections. Okay, what in the world? Wallace's appointment of Gregoire as her lawyer only further confirmed concerns in official circles about the sympathies of the couple. Yeah, I mean, all I need to know is that was her lawyer, and I'd be like, get this girl out of here. There's the door. You're not on the throne anymore. You, her, get out. You know what I mean? Like, what? Oh, that's her lawyer? Ooh, that's a little problematic. Oh, you think so? You need to be falling to your knees, thanking God that you can get David out of here if that's going to be his girlfriend. Okay, on December 18th, a week after the abdication, the diplomat, Army Sergeant, had recovered a memo on the Duke's association with Ribbentrop, noting that Hitler was very distressed at the abdication because he looked upon the late king as a man after his own heart and one who understood the Führerprinzip and was ready to introduce it into his country. That meaning, obviously, the leader principle. Obviously, he did not have the Führerprinzip because he could be so easily distracted by a woman. So I think Hitler read him wrong there. But what I think is that it's very concerning that Hitler would say, oh man, this is pretty bad. How lame. I'd really look forward to working with that guy. If Hitler has ever been able to say that about you, you have dilly-dallied into some dark, dark waters, my friend. The Duke continued to be alternately short-tempered, sullen, bored, and depressed. Can you even imagine it? Here, Kitty Rothschild is laying the supper table every night with her best silver and crystal. She's got all the maids, running hither and there for this man, and all he can do is complain. Kitty Rothschild tried her best, laying on musical entertainment at Christmas Eve with entertainers and musicians from Paris. But who could not be bothered to show up? David! David could not be bothered to show up. He or she has planned entertainment from France. And he's like, gonna skip it. I think I'll watch Mickey Mouse instead. It gets worse. Then, the next day, being Christmas, on his dinner tray, she had placed a gift. What might that gift be? A set of sapphire studs from Cartier. Beautiful cufflinks from Cartier. And somehow it catches him unawares. And he says, oh, sorry. Thanks for the gift. I didn't really get you anything. But don't worry, I'm going to get you something. Don't worry, I got something planned. And then later that day, what does he give her? An autographed picture of himself. That's so lame and junky. That is so lame and junky. How about pay some of the bills that have been piling up? That would be a Christmas present. I despise this man with every fiber of my being. I dislike him maybe even more than I dislike Harry. And that's really saying something. Now, because he's so down in the dumps, he asks that his dear friend, Edward Fruity Metcalf, come help him in his dire need. He's just devastated about where his life is. He's just lonely. Old Kitty's not bringing it like she should. He's still depressed, and would his friend come and see him? So out of the generosity of old Edward Metcalf's heart, he decides to come. Now, I would say that Edward Fruity Metcalf is a man of questionable associations. His wife used to be the mistress of Oswald Mosley, who was the president of the fascist chapter in England. So I would say that perhaps old Fruity Metcalf, as they called him, was not all he could be. But regardless, he comes to his friend in his time of need. And I'm grateful for him because he has some choice pieces to relate to us about David's behavior behind the scenes. Edward Metcalf was 3 years younger than David. He was tall, a handsome cavalry officer who had won the Military Cross during the First World War. The two men had met at Windsor's tour of India in 1922, and Windsor had quickly appointed him as an ADC, attracted by the Irishman's high spirits, good nature, loyalty, knowledge of horses, and personal friendships with many of the Maharajas. Now, David's got nothing to do. Literally nothing to do. I mean, except for play cards, go skiing, take his Turkish bath down in Vienna from, week to week. And it would seem that there's just nothing much for him on the horizons. But in this very sort of tongue-in-cheek comment, Laoney says it was taking time for the Duke to accept the new situation, but there were compensations. And we need to take that with a grain of salt. These are the compensations. These are the things that he now has to do. Oh, there was an invitation to open the Zorine Springs nudist colony. Also, there was a request that he become the mayor of Chippewa Falls in Wisconsin. There's an opportunity. And finally, the Orpheum Theater in Los Angeles offered him and his, quote, lovely lady $1 million and a Hollywood mansion to star in a, quote, stupendous historical film. Look about those offers. You abdicated the throne, but don't worry. There's still a nudist colony you get to open up. Can you imagine feeling as depressed as you would have felt in that situation, and then you look around you and the offers are such as those? Can't wait to get to Chippewa Falls and be the mayor of a small town in Wisconsin. Now, David has shown himself to be completely oblivious this entire chapter, but his oblivion continues. He would call his brother at all hours of the night and day, and he believed that his brother, now the king, should have the time and, more importantly, the will to talk to him. Well, the king did not. Now, remember, his friend Fruity Metcalf is there witnessing all these things that are going on. He wrote to his wife every day, and we have some delicious excerpts from those letters. He wrote to his wife, tonight, David was told at dinner that His Royal Majesty wanted to talk on the phone to him. But David said he couldn't talk. He couldn't take the call, but he asked that it be put through at 10 p.m., so whenever he was available. The answer to this was that His Majesty said he could talk at 6:45 the next day, but he was too busy to talk at any other time. And it was really pathetic to see His Royal Highness's face. He couldn't believe it. He's been so used to having everything done as he wishes. I'm afraid he's going to have many more shocks like this. Yeah, I should think so. And eventually the king stopped taking David's calls altogether. He's like, don't even put him through. I've got bigger fish to fry than to hear what my whiny brother has to say about life. These phone calls, which were bugged by the Austrians, were not only to sort out his own affairs. His possessions had been moved from Fort Belvedere to Frogmore, but also to arrange a financial settlement and press for recognition of Wallace and the family, not least by the family attending their wedding. So that's probably why his brother stopped taking his calls. What does he want to hear anymore about this? He's in the trenches now, trying to figure out this new job as king, and his brother wants to keep calling and being like, why won't you recognize my girlfriend? She's gonna be my wife someday, I think, if we can get everything sorted out. She's part of the family. Why won't you acknowledge my girlfriend? I mean, if one of your family members kept calling you about that, you wouldn't take the calls either. And then all the day long being like, I need more money. I need more. You're not giving me enough. I have to have a certain standard of living. I don't have enough. Now, the truth ultimately is that his brother Bertie was actually sympathetic to his plight, but his mother, the Queen Mary, was adamant that nothing should give the impression that the royal family accepted the relationship, which is probably why he stopped taking the calls, because he just kept getting so much pressure from the rest of the family. Don't even entertain any ideas. Don't give David even one iota of an idea that we're okay with what's going on here. It's that woman that's caused all the trouble anyway. And this view of let's not even give anybody an idea that we're okay with this was shared by the new queen and most courtiers. When Lord Queensborough asked Elizabeth when the Duke might return to Britain, she supposedly replied, not until he comes to my funeral. The result was diminishing goodwill between the brothers and a resentment that was to last throughout the Duke's life. He was shocked that his younger brother did not have the time for long and frequent phone calls, but the real break in their friendship was over the financial settlement. Now, this is a little dull, but I think it's important. Now, the abdication, and in that settlement, it had said that David would receive £25,000 annually, which was traditionally voted for the younger brother of a sovereign. That would either come from the civil list, or if not approved by Parliament, then his brother would pay him the £25,000 a year. It was quickly discovered, though, that the ex-king had not been open about his financial situation, and he was far wealthier than he had claimed or was realized. He had told his brother that he had just under 100,000 pounds. Okay. When in fact, he had over 800,000 pounds squirreled away in a deposit abroad, much of it controlled by Mrs. Simpson. And another 80,000 pounds was shortly to be paid from the civil list and the duchies of Cornwall and Lancaster, the result of money saved over many years. So old David's over there acting like he can't pay his bills, acting like he can't give a decent present to Kitty Rothschild, acting like he ain't got 2 pennies to rub together. Meanwhile, he's got more money than any of them put together. The Duke felt his private wealth, though, was irrelevant to the compensation that he should receive from the crown. You know, that had nothing to do with what they owed him. And he was also very reluctant to relinquish his interests in Balmoral and Sandringham, because he reiterated that he was not being well provided for, and considering the position that he was going to have to maintain and all that he had to give up, he should really be given a lot more in the way of financial compensation. Brother, you could have had everything you wanted if you had just stayed where you were supposed to be. Okay? So don't come whining to all of us now, being like, since this has all been, I've been so terribly put upon, you owe me these many, many pounds. You put it upon your own shoulders. Negotiations over the issue were to continue over the next year. Now, this is the other thing. Remember his lawyer, Walter Monckton? Well, he got that guy to try and thrash out a financial settlement after Windsor supposedly threatened not to sell his interest in Balmoral and Sandringham, because he said that there was a bunch of sportsmen in New York from 7th Avenue who were only too willing to pay sufficient for shooting rights on those 2 estates, so to him. So he wasn't about to relinquish his rights in those estates because he could make some money off of these hunters who wanted the experience. So then they had to drag out all this business about a mock sale of Sandringham, York Cottage, Balmoral, Burke Hall, and their contents. And it gave a value of £256,000, which put into a trust fund brought an annual income of £5,000. Rather than open a can of worms by seeking money through the civil list, George VI agreed to top this up by £20,000. In return, Windsor agreed to pay £5,000 of pensions to former members of staff. So, all these people are out on a job because of his sudden decision to just leave. So he does owe them some kind of compensation. But of course, that money, that £5,000, is going to come off the annual income from all of his sales of Sandringham, York Cottage, Balmoral, and Burke Hall. But it is a mock sale because, he's decided to leave. When you decide to leave, do you even get to retain your rights in all of these estates? It was so ridiculous. It was all just such a ridiculous fight. If you're no longer king, if you've said, I don't want the throne, that means you also don't get the benefits of having been the king. You withdraw your rights to the estates. So they then come around and be like, well, what are you going to compensate me for my hold on all these? You don't have a hold on them. You're not the king anymore. It's not your property anymore. It's not your throne. It's not your crown. It's nothing. So, they were really just throwing him a bone to keep him quiet and to get him on his way, because they really shouldn't have had to pay him a dime, Anyway, I think the real thing is that if it had just been him, they might have been able to cut him out. What do they care about his whining? Just don't answer his calls. But the person they're really worried about was that Mrs. Simpson. She was way more of a problem to them. And she had promised that if she didn't get what she wanted, she would show back up in England and be a problem. And that's probably why they did what they did as far as giving him what he didn't deserve. Now, of course, remember, we've still got Fruity Metcalf staying with David. So while he's on all these long conversations about the protracted financial situation, and it's taking on and on and on, it's going, he's writing daily letters to his wife, telling her about all the shenanigans over at the Schloss. And he says to his wife, of course, David's on the line for hours and hours every day to Cannes, meaning to Mrs. Simpson. He says, I somehow don't think these talks go well sometimes. She seems to be always picking on him or complaining about something that she thinks he hasn't done and ought to do. All he is living for is to be with her on the 27th April. As we came back every night after skiing, he says, one more day nearly over. It's very pathetic. Never have I seen a man more madly in love. The problems continued, relayed in Fruity's daily letters to Baba, his wife. He called her Baba. She is at him every day on the phone. He always seems to be excusing himself for something or other, wrote Fruity on January 27th. I feel so sorry for him. He's never able to do what she considers the right thing. And then he wrote, the evenings lately have been dreadful. He won't think of bed before 3 a.m. And now he started playing the accordion and the bagpipes. Y'all, it was the drums before, but now he's dragged out the bagpipes. God have mercy. Last night there was a terrible row on the phone. Wallace said she'd heard that he was having an affair with Kitty. This is damn funny. But I can tell you it's no joke last night. He got into a terrible state. Their conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. And then he goes on to say, David pays for as little as he can when we go anywhere. I don't believe I'll be able to stick it here much longer. And the other person who was real sick and tired of the whole thing was Kitty Rothschild herself. I mean, she had done everything for this guy, and the complete and total ingrate is what he was. Kitty Rothschild had had enough, and that day she returned to Paris. The Duke was still in bed, and as Fruity reported, never saw her to say goodbye or thank her for all that she had done. She was frightfully hurt, and I don't blame her. He's awfully difficult at times, and this is the worst thing he's done yet. I went down to the station with a letter which I got him to write to her, and that made things a bit better. He also never saw the servants to tip them or thank them. All due to more damn talking to cans. Never stops. Can you even believe this? His hostess, who has done everything for him this entire time. He's so ungrateful to her, she finally decides to just go home. And he doesn't even have the common decency to get out of bed to say goodbye to her. Nor does he have the common decency even to write her a thank you note until Metcalf was like, hey, dude, could you not thank the lady for everything she's done? Here's a piece of paper, here's a pen, say these things, write them down, I'll go take it to her. But don't do this, this is so rude. Even with the financial arrangements almost sorted, though they would only be finalized in 1938, the couple's future remained uncertain. For example, where were they to live? It was clear they were not welcome in Britain for the moment, and the decision was not helped by the suggestion that the Duke would now have to pay income tax. There were preliminary negotiations to buy Cloisters, which was this huge Gothic residence outside of Baltimore, built in 1932, but that came to nothing. And then, in March, Wallace and her maid Mary Burke and 26 pieces of luggage moved to Chateau de Condé, a fairy tale castle of high towers, pointed turrets, and Gothic doorways, in preparation for her third wedding. Now, it's very interesting how she found this chateau, because it was all through her old friends, the Rogers. Now, remember I talked about them at the beginning of the episode. Herman Rogers was the husband of her friend Catherine Rogers, remember? And they had met in China when she was seeking a divorce from her first husband. I don't understand this relationship. I don't understand who Herman is to her. I don't understand any of it. But this house was quite stunning. It was built by the 5th richest man in America and his American wife, Fern, and they had set about modernizing the chateau, which had been built in 1508, installing state-of-the-art facilities that included central heating, ensuite bathrooms, a $15,000 telephone system with a full-time telephonist, Art Deco bathrooms, huge refrigerators, a bar in the old kitchen, which still had the hooks for game, and a gym with the latest exercise equipment. An underground passage led to an old hunting lodge, which Beddoe, the renovator of the home, had converted into a billiard room. Now, this is the thing that I find so interesting, and this is why I raise my eyebrows to this entire thing. Herman Rogers, the one who had helped her to find this home, the one who was friends with the original owner and renovator of the home, had decided that he was going to, and his wife, were going to move into the house with Wallace Simpson, but that he was going to take a bedroom that was right next door to Wallace's bedroom and an adjoining sitting room with a daybed. As she later wrote, Herman decided to take this for himself. He'd slept in a room adjoining mine with a gun under his pillow ever since I had arrived from England more than 3 months before. Upstairs were several other bedrooms, of which Catherine took one. Are you hearing what I'm saying to you? All right, her friend Catherine's husband has decided to sleep in a room that is next to hers. There's a door connecting the 2 bedrooms, and he hasn't stopped guarding Wallace Simpson since the minute she came over from England. He is in such a protective state over her that he needs to sleep right next to her with a gun under her pillow in case anybody tries to get her. Now, she had death threats, but remember, there was protective agents who were following Wallace Simpson from England. They're afraid that she was going to make some inroads with the political elite in Germany. So she had protective officers around her, at least two, I believe the book said. And yet this Herman feels that he needs to be sleeping right next to her with a gun under her pillow. So concerned is he about her safety. And Catherine is just sleeping in some random bedroom upstairs. Catherine, what's going on? It's like, this would not work for me. This would not work for me. If my spouse wanted to sleep in a bedroom next to somebody of the opposite sex and they have an adjoining room and then I'm just supposed to find some other room in the house to sleep in, we'd have problems. Well, she was living in this new home, which I suppose is going to be the one that she and David will live in after they can finally get married. She changed her name by deed poll to Wallace Warfield, and she was waiting for that marriage to go ahead. I'm not really sure why she felt the need to change her name at this point, because she'd gone on as Wallace Simpson for a while even after the divorce, but now suddenly she wants it to be Wallace Warfield. Who knows? So, as you'll recall, this whole chapter is all about them waiting for the wedding, waiting for them to get the okay that they can get married, waiting for the solicitors who have been probing into all of the craziness around the divorce of Wallace Simpson from her second husband. They're waiting for them to get the go-ahead that they can get married. The answer came on March 18th when Sir Thomas Barnes, the Treasury solicitor, announced that there had been no evidence of collusion and the marriage could proceed, though he had not interviewed the one servant who might have established the truth. Now, Wallace Simpson's servant, Mary Burke, could have certainly provided all the details necessary if they really wanted to know what was going on behind the scenes with Wallace, her husband, and David. But they didn't bother to ask her, and the reason was, it's not the practice of the king's proctor to endeavor to get information from the servants. The servants are the ones who have the information, dude. Like, do you not understand? These people talk. They're the ones who knows what's really going on. If you want to get any information, I'd go talk to the servants first. Anyway, he didn't bother. But it doesn't matter. It's clear that evidence did exist of collusion between the three of those people, David, Wallace, and her husband, Ernest Simpson. Ernest Simpson had obligingly been caught in bed with his future wife, Mary Rafferty, so that Wallace could sue him for adultery, so that she could get out of the marriage. And then there was the question of payment. Then, of course, he's going to have to pay her this big fee, you commit adultery, now you've got to pay alimony. And then there is paper trails that show that he did pay out a sum of money to Simpson, but then it is thought that the king refunded Ernest Simpson those costs. Weird. It's a weird situation. And then, of course, perjury was involved, but the king's proctor chose not to use any of this evidence. And they did not use the evidence of David's adultery with Wallace in Budapest in 1935, where there is an unsigned 3-page memo confirming, and that memo still remains on file. But nobody bothered about the fact that Simpson had been wandering around having her own affairs on her husband. And nobody bothered about the weird transactional situation between Wallace. Oh no, I just walked in and my husband's having an affair. Oh, you owe me money. Okay, here's the money. And then the king comes and pays that money back. Like, it's very weird. It's all so that they could get the divorce, so that they could get married, because he really, really, really wanted to marry Wallace Simpson, even though she would have been perfectly fine just being his mistress. And apparently, Ernest Simpson was okay with that arrangement too. I mean, he was kind of pimping her out, honestly, because he was lining his pockets for quite a while with the king's money. So it's incredibly weird. But they just, honestly, I think they just want to wash their hands of it, let him go marry the woman. The evidence was there if they wanted to find it about all the collusion, but I don't think they did. I think they just wanted him to pack up, go, shut up. We don't want the problem anymore. Okay, now we come to the final story of this chapter. It's a little bit tragic. I'm very sad for Slipper, his little dog that he loved to carry around. At the beginning of April, the Duke had sent his Cairn Terrier, Slipper, sometimes called Mr. Lou, to Wallace at Candie. And the next day, while chasing a rabbit, Slipper was bitten by a viper. Though rushed to the local vet in Tours, it died that night. And she writes to him and says, in the most melodramatic thing I've ever heard, "My darling, I've just given Herman Mr. Lou's rug to wrap his little body in before Herman buries him. Even God seems to have forgotten we, For surely this is an unnecessary sorrow for us, reported Wallace. He was our dog, not yours or mine, but us, and he loved us both so, and now the principal guest at the wedding is no more. Well, as Lowney says in his last sentence of the chapter, the death of that dog was not good portent for their marriage. No, it was not. And Wallace is just, she's such a master manipulator this entire book. You know, I mean, she's either a master manipulator or David's an idiot. I think both are sort of true. But, like, you know, I'm not saying she didn't care about the dog. I'm sure she did love the dog. But the way she writes about it is just so melodramatic. You know, it's like, how could God be raining this suffering on us? And even he's forgotten about us. And this dog was us. It was our love. It was a picture of our love. And the only one who would have been happy for us at our wedding was Mr. Lou / Slippers. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to mock their sadness. It's sad to lose a dog, but just the way she writes about it is just so. I mean, I just like, couldn't you just be like, I'm devastated the dog is dead, instead of trying to be like, this dog represented our love, and now our love is dying in the ground cold. I don't know. So that's the end of that chapter. Y'all let me know what you think about this whole Herman situation. Why is Herman lurking around in the background so? Now, I've read other books, and this Herman individual, I think, was her true love. He certainly was her true confidant, the one who she felt ultimately took care of her. I don't think David would make anybody feel safe. David is so emotionally unstable himself. Can you imagine trying to find any kind of even footing with a person like that? Like, this wouldn't be somebody you could go and tell about your day, because he just can't even hardly handle his own emotions, let alone yours. So I imagine that she and Herman did have a good friendship, but was it more than that? That's what I want to know. And why was Catherine allowing Herman to go sleep in that bedroom next to him? And also, can we talk about how rude he was to Kitty Rothschild? Let's talk about that in the comments. Are you guys as blown away by this as me? And that stupid autographed picture after she gave him a pair of Cartier sapphire studs? And then his response is, oh, oops, I forgot it's Christmas and I should have gotten you a gift. How about this autographed photograph? Really? Tell me in the comments, what's most surprised you in this chapter? Because I was blown away from the front to the last page. The stuff about her lawyer? That guy? I mean, my mind was blown, like, continually as the chapter went by. And how much did you guys love Fruity Metcalf and his letters back to his wife? That guy spared no detail. All right, well, I've already gone. I mean, this is a long episode, like I said it was going to be, but thank you so much for enjoying the second chapter with me. We will have another episode next weekend on chapter 3, and if I have time, I will try to cut up this longer episode into clips like I used to do, because I think that those are great. Sometimes you just want to hear like a certain part of the story, and you don't want to have to listen to the whole episode all over again. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next weekend. Bye.